Hi, this is Bob Fornell, and this is going to be my rant on ChatGPT. Um, this might be a bit long, so bear with me, and we'll get through it. So, over the last few weeks, I've had several discussions with folks, interactions about ChatGPT, and at the moment has me a bit riled up, and I thought I'd record this and get my thoughts out on it, and take it as you will. Um, most of what I had were positive interactions to this point. Most of my research on ChatGPT has been okay. Um, so let me start with these interactions. Had a senior developer several weeks ago that I chatted with on an event over the weekend. It was an in-person event, and he had done research. I had done research, very comparable stuff. And what I pointed out was that I was only able to evaluate the correctness or incorrectness of a solution based on my years of experience, that I had targeted very specific sets of code that I know and I know well, that I've used frequently. And we'll see some of that later on in this video. And I did see some cases where there were some positives and were some things that I potentially could use. But I was actually kind of scared with what might happen with folks with less experience. Later on in that event, he actually came to me and told me that he had a scenario he was working on. It was front-end Masonry, in my opinion. That was kind of cool. Not long after that, I had an individual telling me about an interview where there were these weird lags in the conversation, and she was absolutely sure that he was typing her questions into ChatGPT to get answers and feeding those answers back. Would have been interesting. We'd have been wearing glasses, and right, she's the kind of person who would have zoomed in to see what he was looking at on the screen. Then recently, I watched a video from a Pluralsight author. I'll include the link in the notes to this video about when ChatGPT is confidently wrong. I mean, the link will be there. You have to see it. It had actually a factual piece of information in this entire conversation that he did with ChatGPT. And then the recent one, the one that got me to really put all this together and finalize this up, because I had some of these notes together and I just finished adding these pieces on, was hearing about a student that had created an app for her boot camp completely with ChatGPT and admitted to several of her projects and her repos being done that way, and had some wonderful excuses, I'm sure, as to why she did what she did. So moving forward here, that senior developer, we discussed the research. There needed to be depth of understanding. He did ask me about front end code later in the day, and I told him flat out that yes, you can use it, but you got to be careful with it. And the recommendations it was making in that case were really not too horrible. And this is an individual that certainly would take that to the right folks. I mean, it clearly showed that he was going to find the right level. He was using it to initiate his research, which I thought was pretty cool. Again, the interview, odd lagging, and she was absolutely sure about the fact that he was using ChatGPT to get the answers to questions. I mean, this is one I think that's going to come back and bite us down the road. Companies will figure this out. I mean, it's not hard to figure out that you're stopping and taking time to type things in. I can foresee scenarios where instead of take-home test code, you're going to be given code on a screen and said, explain this to me. And one of the scenarios I had heard years ago, an individual had taken 10 different sets of code, varying levels of complexity, and took the really simple ones to the really hard ones to the most senior people within the company, and then the next people down, and the next people down, all the way down to the junior folks within the company. And so when somebody got stumped at a certain level, you have a really good gauge as to where they are skill level compared to other folks within your company, other people that you know their skill sets, and you know how they work. This is going to be on a screen. There isn't going to be time to type this code in and get information about it. You have to know what you're talking about. In my mind, with something like that, without a strong base and understanding of code, of problem solving, of debugging, the lack of understanding is going to shine through fairly easily. The interview processes are going to change, I think, if this becomes more prevalent. The video, when ChatGPT was confidently wrong, it was wrong almost 100% of the time. I think it got a title right. He was asked for a title of a book, and it gave a title of a research paper, but there actually was a title with that name somewhere in the history of computers, although it wasn't what the ChatGPT was claiming it to be. And here, I got this strong impression of those confident developers that I've met over the years. Those guys that this is the right way to do things. You have to do it this way. You have to. And when you hear them say things, 90% of the time, you know they're wrong. There's no doubt in your mind they're wrong. And then the other 10% of the time, there's just enough truth there that you go do some research to find out if it was right or wrong. Okay. And I will leave the link. It's absolutely worth watching. That video probably is shorter than this one. The student that created apps, the excuses given were, this is how I stay competitive when everybody's doing this. I looked at the code that it generated and I understood the code, so I figured that's enough. Okay. This is where I have the most issue. I used to be a teacher. I taught computers in a prison for over a decade. And this is my being a teacher in a prison voice, talking with somebody that's going the wrong route. This is an inmate mentality. Okay. So let's talk about this just a little bit. We're using ChatGPT. It's a tool to generate code. Okay. I equate this to back in grade school, high school, when you were learning math. All right. In my day, and I know it's changed a little bit recently, they're bringing calculators in a little bit earlier, but in my day, you didn't use calculators until you got to college. I think it was my first calculus class where I was allowed to use a calculator. Prior to that, I had to do the math manually. Everybody I knew was doing the math manually. These days, my son does his math manually, but I hand him the calculator and he uses that to check his answers, and that's as far as it goes. Okay. That saves me a little bit of time. The assumption is that you have to know those lower level concepts. When you get to those higher level concepts, like in math, you get to calculus. The understanding is that you have a basis in the simple. So you can use that calculator to speed up those simple processes a little bit more. If those calculators had been used all the way through our education from the time that you're learning addition and subtraction, you're not learning addition and subtraction, you're learning how to use the calculator. Those advanced topics then become nearly impossible because you don't have that strong understanding of the basics. Okay. I hear a student say, I look at the code and understand it. In this scenario, I can tell you that that's patently false. If you understood the code as well as you say you do, you never would have written, or you would have written the code yourself. You never would have used a tool to generate the code. The tools become a crutch. And to be honest, for a student like that, that's going to keep you junior forever. It really is. There's no room for you to grow to more advanced topics. Why is a company going to keep somebody on that all they do is copy paste? They can hire somebody else for far less money to copy and paste from ChatGPT. In my mind, I use a phrase: practice, patience, persistence. Practice, patience, and persistence lead to improvement of your skills over time. Improvement of your skills over time is what's going to lead to growth and more opportunity in this field. Not a tool. Okay. The tool is going to lead you down a path, right or wrong. Okay. If you don't have the skill set to evaluate right from wrong, you're going down one of the two. You don't know which one. Okay. Again, in my mind, why would you spend the money for boot camp? Why would you spend the money for college to cheat? To bypass the learning process? Why not just save your money and have ChatGPT write your resume, write your portfolio, answer the interview questions for you? You're going to be in the same position either way, and you probably owe less money at the end of the process. You're there to learn. Okay. And it's not learning the tool, it's learning programming, it's learning problem solving, it's learning diagnostics and things like that. These are important skills that are going to carry you forward someday if you actually learn them. All right. Inmate mentality. Okay. If ChatGPT were human, I'd be saying that it's lying through its teeth more often than not. Okay. This conversational code base is simply plugging together a series of sentences. It has no understanding of what it's looking at. If we prefaced every one of the answers with, I don't know anything about writing code, but here's an example, would that make you look at it any different? Okay. Inmates always blame somebody else. I've often heard everybody around me is doing whatever this dumb thing is, so I did it too. Take ownership of your learning. Okay. There seems to be a mentality at times of we have to succeed at all costs. And one of the biggest things that I push when it comes to development is that we learn most from failure. We're going to fail all the time, more often than not. We learn from that. We build something better because of what we've learned in the failure. Okay. That is the inmate mentality. I've heard it hundreds, if not thousands of times. And as you can tell, it bugs me a little bit. Okay. So stepping back from that a little bit, let's go into some of my research. Okay. Because I don't want to base this all on what I've heard. Okay. This is what I've seen. These are 4 of the scenarios that I ran. I ran about 12 different scenarios, and these are what I was asking was questions on context, things that I know about. I have a lot of depth about. So I wanted to see how it did. The first was Angular API code. I've probably written Angular APIs to do gets and posts and things like that hundreds of times. Wrote unit tests against those. I've actually got some really good patterns that I like, that I look to set up and structure, and I think they work really, really well. I recently have been working on building an Angular library, and I ran into problems at multiple levels, and I wanted to see what ChatGPT would do. And actually, in one case here, at a level positive, we'll talk about that. I've done a lot of GitHub actions, pushing to GitHub pages, both in Angular and React. So I wanted to see what ChatGPT would do there. And I really wanted to see what it did with regular expressions, how it would generate regular expressions, and potentially how it would evaluate and set up positives and negatives for unit tests. So I'm going to go over these 4 here in a little bit of depth, not a lot, but just kind of enough to show you that, it is a little hairy at times. Okay. But general overall thoughts. As I started my research, as I went through my research, that phrasing your query with ChatGPT is as complicated and nuanced as doing a proper Google search. Okay. Occasionally I got back an answer that pointed me in a better direction from my Google searches, which That's okay. It takes knowledge and experience to evaluate the usefulness of an answer. I mean, some of these were nuanced. Some of these were scenarios where I get 5 or 6 different answers that technically were all valid answers, but not necessarily the right answer. And yes, there are right answers in some cases. Okay. An answer can be beyond your skill set. And if it's beyond our skill set to evaluate, how do we evaluate? You find somebody, right? Or you assume it's right when it could be wrong. Okay. It generated a good list of improvements to code. I did like that one. It generated a solid set of unit tests about 50% of the time. But there was 50% of the time where I got weird results. Now I know how to evaluate unit tests. So there's a little bit use for me there at my experience level. Okay. But I've written hundreds, if not hundreds of thousands of units. I almost said hundreds and thousands, but probably on the order of close to 100,000 plus unit tests over the years. Okay. So some of the questions I use. I'm looking for JavaScript code to connect to an API endpoint with basic error handling. Can you do the same thing with Angular TypeScript? Can you do the same thing with async await and catch blocks? Can you create an Angular service with a get data function to get data from an API endpoint? Now you can see how my answers changed here. Okay, it started with, hey, I want to create JavaScript code connecting an endpoint. And I realized I got the wrong result. Then I had to shift. Can you do the same thing with Angular TypeScript? Okay, assuming Angular and TypeScript go together, they do. Almost got an answer, but it did a lot of promise chaining, which we started to phase out with async await. So I asked for async await. And then I got smart and I'm like, well, add a try catch block in there, assuming it wouldn't be smart enough to add a try catch block in there. And then I had to create the whole service, but I had to see the size of number 4, right? And then can you write the unit tests for the service? I wanted to see what we did there too, because I want to write the whole thing. And then the final one, I think, was probably where my moment of brilliance was in doing this, which was, is there a better way to design service? And what I realized here was I got 4 really good answers that I had already answered about the way I use these services. But they could be great talking points for someone that is just getting used to the code base. I might want to talk to the senior and maybe get some more insight into why things are built the way they are. Okay. And I want to point out that when I hit number 4, I actually had to regenerate 5 times to get it to come up with an answer similar to what I expected. Okay. None of them were wrong answers. They would have worked. Okay. But there are reasons that I use the one I do, and I've been writing Angular for a long time. I'm very, very confident in what I build. Okay. So that final question that I asked about the other things that we could do, is there a better way to design the service? Returned a couple of things here. So return a single instance using behavior subject. Instead of returning a new observable from the function itself, return an instance of behavior subject. If you don't know what this means, what it means to me is it separates the call of the data and somebody using the data. Okay, so it's not all one bundled thing. Caching the data. Okay, I hadn't even thought about caching the data. In some cases, that might be a good one. Most cases, I would guess caching the data might not be appropriate. But there are cases where probably would be good. Now, returning the error state was an interesting way of doing it. We already have error handling built into most of the applications I do separate from. But returning that error state, I think, is kind of an interesting way of letting the component or whatever is utilizing that data know what's going on. And then using a generic type for the behavior subject, which is a question that kind of ties to that first one. And really was not a bad suggestion, not super appropriate for the kind of stuff that I do. But I mean, these are interesting. And I really would have been interested had these been asked as questions of me as a senior from somebody writing and following one of these patterns I'm looking at and going, not just asking what in the world's going on here, right? So next round in here, or one of the other questions asked in here, is there a better way to design the service? Same one we had looked at. This is a service we're looking at here. Okay, so it built a data response that had data or an error. Okay, so in the case of an error, it added the null in for the data as it returned that object. This is generally the way I write the pattern. Okay, so if we look in here and you see that data subject up there, right over here by the data service, this is the way I do it. I really like this pattern. Okay, a wrap and a try catch. I'm using async await to make this clean and not have all these change things. It's very easy to read and understand what's going on. What they did in here where they set this.data equal to data, I'm not quite sure why that happened. Doesn't necessarily need to be there. But really not too far off what I do. Okay, it took 5 iterations, 6 iterations actually, because I had to regen 5 times to get to this. Okay, all kinds of other weird iterations on there. Okay, so the Angular library questions. Can you generate an input component for Angular library? I'm building a library. I wanted to see what it generated. Okay. Didn't have an event emitter. I need an event emitter because I need the data to come out from these library components, right? So we added that one. Can you show me how to use this on a component? Okay. Can you show me unit tests? Can you show me Storybook? Okay. If you haven't worked with Storybook, it's for component libraries. And have it handle the value change from the event emitter. I hadn't wired that up yet in Storybook in the library that I'm doing. On up, I didn't have to, but for different purposes. But what it gave me here wasn't right as far as I know, but in one of the answers, there was this little hint that led me in the right direction. Okay. So again, one place where I got something really, really close. So the Storybook component was the one that actually gave me this little hint on what to do, and that was to use the action plugin. Most of the rest of this I didn't use. Found some very good documentation that led us in the right direction. Okay, but to be honest, that action piece was what finally got me to find the data I needed. Okay, the GitHub Actions, GitHub Pages questions. Can you show me how to set up an Angular project, use GitHub Actions to build GitHub Pages? What do I need to modify in my Angular project to make it work on GitHub Pages? What do I need to modify in a React project to make it work? I know what these modifications are. I've done it a few times. What I realized was the first scenario was that I was seeing old versions of the Angular actions, okay, that are in the Angular store and have all these versions and things like this. And this is when I realized that the data is 3 years out of date, and went back and looked at some of my Angular answers to see what was in there, because it was pretty close, but there were some cases where the out-of-date data came back to bite me in using ChatGPT. The Angular modifications and the React modifications look reasonable and might work. Okay, I haven't tested them yet. My guess is they're probably not going to work. Most of the time, these don't work the first time. Okay, I'd be really surprised if ChatGPT does better than I do on these. Okay, and I know what the right are, and I break it every time the first time. The email expressions, generate a JavaScript email, regular expression. This is one of the most complicated emails to write. I quite often will pass it off to the back end, and they use some other service to verify an email and that kind of stuff, because I would rather not have the front end validate it, because there are so many weird exceptions to emails. Okay. And then what I realized was in the answer of the first one, it said that this is not a comprehensive answer. So I asked the next question was generate a comprehensive email, regular expression. It prompted that, and it actually did produce something that looks reasonable. I read a lot of regex, and I know that that's reasonable. And then asked it to design some unit tests against the comprehensive regex. It's the email The regular expressions here are fairly complicated, and my guess would be managing this over time, as email things evolve and we allow different exceptions and that kind of stuff. The longer the regex is, the more complicated it is, the harder it's going to be to maintain. Okay. The tests were solid. Not exactly what I expected. They were valid tests. There was a lot of looping and that kind of stuff. My guess is that the vast majority of the data probably was off, the positive and negatives, just in what I saw. Okay. So this is my PSA. If you're taking if you're heeding my warnings and you're going to be sparing with ChatGPT and you're not going to generate actual code that you're going to use day to day, skip this part, log out now, right? So positives. Asking, what does this code do? There's nothing wrong there. Okay. Be wary of the answer it gives you. It might be a BS answer. Okay. But there could be enough there to help you build a good Google search. Okay. Ask, what could be done to improve this code? Don't use that directly to improve the code, but use that to ask questions on why the code's written the way it is, right? Asking for unit tests works in some scenarios, so be careful with that based on your experience level. My guess is, from what I saw of all the unit tests I looked at in all 12 of my scenarios, is that I could probably shave off 10 to 20% of my time writing unit tests. It's not a significant savings. Okay. It is a savings. Okay, but it's a lot of time put in other areas just to run the ChatGPT across the board to figure out where the 20% is. So I probably am closer to 10. Okay. And debugging a code might be okay. I have not tested anything where I had broken code and I pushed it into ChatGPT to see what it would suggest. I've heard that it doesn't always give you the right answer, but quite often will point you in the direction of the right answer. So that's something to be said for that. This is my rant on ChatGPT. I wanted to leave it on a positive. Okay, the teacher in me got really irritated, and I'm now up at 1:47 in the morning, my time, recording this because I literally was not going to get to sleep till I got this out of my system. It's a tool. That's all it is. And this tool doesn't know whether it's giving you good code or bad code. If you don't know if it's giving you good code or bad code, you get what you get. Okay. And my guess is it's going to come back and bite you more often than not. From the vast majority of what I looked at here, at best, you're in a 20 to 30% chance that it's correct at the level you need. If correct at all. Okay. This is hazardous stuff. This is dangerous stuff if we're not careful with it. It is a tool. It can provide some good things if we take care. Okay. I'm going to leave it at that, guys. Thank you.